Hello everyone and welcome back to Dragalia Foundry, a fan channel where everything Dragalia Lost can be found. This video is going to contain my review of the latest Summon Showcase. It's another Gala remix, this time around featuring Nino, Faeblessed Tobias, and the return of Gala Chelle. I will definitely be summoning on this showcase as Chelle is the only Gala adventure I'm missing. I'm super excited she made an appearance here, although I know it's going to be disappointing for some who were expecting Gala Leonidas, as he is currently the oldest Gala adventure to not have had a remix. So they skipped over him for now and went straight to Gala Chelle. I'm happy about it because I happened to pull him and get very lucky in doing so, but for some of you who are waiting for him, you might have to wait a little bit longer. Gala Chelle, Nino, and Faeblessed Tobias all strike me as pretty powerful adventurers. Also on the showcase, in the dragon slot, we have Gala Reborn Poseidon, also an appearance right up, excellent water dragon. But my overall opinion on this showcase is that while everything here is good, it's also non-essential. And as endgame content has continued to progress in difficulty, it feels that more and more you need certain roles to be filled to be successful in endgame teams. You need to tick certain boxes in your team composition, so it's hard to just throw in generically good adventures and expect to have success. For some of the hardest legend content, you want things like Dispel. You want somebody on your team to cover afflictions. You probably want a healer on your team, preferably one who can provide overdamage. Otherwise, you might want somebody else to have an overdamage shared skill. And related to overdamage, you often want to have an adventure that can have a high hit count, as increasingly we've run into quests with hit count related mechanics. So overall, I think because the conditions on the type of team you want to have for endgame quests has become a little bit more stringent, yes, there are some interchangeable pieces here and there, but it makes it so that a generically powerful adventurer who isn't able to do at least one of those things for you, it's hard to just throw them on to a random team and be particularly successful. So that's kind of where I feel this showcase lands. Everything's good, but I don't see it as being good enough that you have to summon for it. It feels like these are pieces that are mostly replaceable by other adventurers. So that's my take on this showcase. I will be summoning just because it's the only Gala adventure I'm missing, and I like both Nino and Faeblessed Tobias and their designs. Have not actually checked out the story yet, so please don't spoil me, but I'm going to be making a video on that soon to check that out, just have not had time to get around to it. We also have a lot of other things happening in Dragalia as of late. It's been a while since I made any video, but Time War in Torment is coming out. We have our usual double drop and half stamina goodness, including on some endgame quests as far as just generic events. New mana spirals keep coming through, and new Trials of the Mighty. Just today, we got John d'Arc's Trial. I have been enjoying Dragalia quietly on the sidelines, while also just participating in some other stuff. Have been watching the NBA playoffs, that's been very fun. Have also been enjoying E3 this past week. The Nintendo Direct, for me, was really exciting. I am looking forward to the Advance Wars 1 and 2 remake, looking forward to Breath of the Wild 2, of course, and a couple other things in there that were just really cool. So yeah, a lot of that stuff coming out this year. And otherwise, it's also been a return to work in person for me. So if I haven't been around as often as of late, those are all some of the contributing factors, but still enjoying DL here over on the side. Anyway, let's get into the showcase. We have Nino, Faeblessed Tobias, and Gala Chelle, as well as Gala Reborn Poseidon. I won't spend a lot of time in this video to talk about Gala Reborn Poseidon. I think most of my opinion from my Dragon Tier List video, at least the wrap-up, stands. Excellent dragon, probably the best water dragon at this point now that we see how Curse of Nihility works. I think that GNC have fallen off a little bit. They're obviously still excellent, but as an investment in terms of Sunlight Stones, I would go for Gala Reborn Poseidon, and I will focus here on the other three, so let's go through them. Nino, with one wing of the goddess, I can soar. So very pretty design. She has a horse in her portrait. I don't know what that is about yet, but I suppose I will find out soon when I play through the story. Fairy Stance does damage to enemies directly ahead and partially fills the user's Dragon Drive gauge, so she is a Dragon Drive adventurer. During Dragon Drive, it's going to consume some of the user's Dragon Drive gauge, deal damage to enemies directly ahead, and fill 100% of this skill's skill gauge after use. So it appears as though her Dragon Drive style is more like Bellina's, where you can repeatedly use the same skill, but using that skill consumes the Dragon Drive gauge. That is something that differentiates Bellina from other adventurers like, let's say, Urias. In Urias's Dragon Drive state, you can't maintain it constantly. It's going to run out eventually, but with Bellina's, you could technically just keep it up by doing basic attacks. So this just basically does damage. There's no special properties to it. The second skill here, Crescent Feria, deals damage to the target nearby enemies and reduces strength during Dragon Drive. Reduces strength as well as defense. So 5% defense reduction for 10 seconds doesn't stack. Strength reduction 10% for a longer 30 seconds. That doesn't say does not stack on it, but I guess it might stack. But either way, a strength reduction is usually not super critical. So when I look at these two skills, in Nino's case, she's in the wind element, so the content you're going to think about using her for would be, let's say, Legend Ciela or Master difficulty of Yaldabaoth in Phase 2. And for Legend Ciela, yes, it's helpful to have a sword adventure to help shred the overdrive gauge, but one of the most important and critical things in that battle tends to be Dispel, so not having a Dispel option here is a little bit concerning. You know, there are limited slots to fit that in, and you can bring it via shared skills, but that is one of the more critical things for that fight. For Yaldabaoth, one of the big things is, a couple things I guess, are hitting in a wide area. A little hard to read just based on the information on the screen. Looking at some of the videos that have been posted of Nino, seems like when she's in Dragon Drive, she hits in a decently wide area to maybe take down some of the mobs in Yaldabaoth. But it's also helpful to have a high hit count for that as well, I think. Gosh, it's been a minute since I played Yaldabaoth. But there are hit count related mechanics, right? Aren't there some hit count orbs in that or something? Wow, I'm totally forgetting. Maybe not. I guess it's more so Midgard Stormer 0. I think of him as a hit count type mechanic, but like he's also just a screen wipe AoE. Let me know if I've forgotten something crazy, but there's no Dispel. AoE a little bit questionable, small amount of hits on some of these, but decent damage. The strength and defense reduction is, I would say strength reduction is mostly an irrelevant thing in auto. But Legend Ciela is not a type of content you're going to auto reliably, and neither is Master Yaldabaoth. And so for auto, you're talking like Master Ciela and below, but that is really well solved by Templar Hope plus Ronzel plus Lowen plus 1, usually somebody like a Silas, let's say. So I just don't see this being a necessity. Again, with water foes, Ciela, particularly Master difficulty and below, it's just so easy to clear with lower rarity adventurers that it's hard to imagine this being super successful, especially if the AI mechanics on the Dragon Drive are at all in question. Some adventurers are good about using their Dragon Drive, such as Urias. Some, like Bellina on AI, do not seem to use it, so maybe this would be a similar case to Bellina. I'm not 100% sure on that, but that, if anything, would strike me as more of a liability than a benefit. Her co-ability and chain co-ability, though, are more exciting for sure, especially that chain co-ability. Her co-ability is Dragon Haste plus 15%, and then her chain co-ability is combo equals critical rate 5. So if a team member is attuned to win, increases their critical rate by 1% for every 10 hit combo, it can stack up to 20 times, but all stacks will be lost when the combo counter resets. Benefits your whole team. So this will work really well with adventurers that can maintain a combo. You can get up to a 20% critical rate just off this chain co-ability, meaning that sometimes, if you're able to get that high of a combo count, this is going to be superior to you, for you, than the dagger co-ability of just 10% critical rate. The other thing that's noteworthy about this type of chain co-ability, most chain co-abilities that provide a type of stat benefit like this are considered visible buffs, and they are dispelled by Curse of Nihility. For whatever reason, this type of Chainco ability, also seen on Kimono Elisan, does not count as a visible buff. It is a passive invisible buff, and therefore Curse of Nihility does not dispel this. So this is a legitimate, really good backline Chainco ability to have if you can maintain a combo even in a Curse of Nihility setting. So this might be one of the better things. This might be one of the better things about Nino as of now, but Wind is also pretty competitive as far as your backline slots because Mona just gives you some extra elemental damage. You have Dragalia Zanefried with extra skill damage, as well as some Dragon's Claws that would get dispelled by Curse of Nihility, but are still otherwise pretty good to have in the backline. And then you have to compare this for your last slot against something like a Blade, let's say, maybe some other Wind abilities that are not top of mind for me, but this still is pretty good. So this might be one of the better aspects about Nino. Her abilities include Blessed Bloodline 2, so this is what grants her Dragon Drive gauge and changes the Shapeshift button into a Dragon Drive button. Tapping it activates Dragon Drive. It's going to enhance standard attacks, dash attacks, and force strikes, and they fill up the Dragon Drive gauge if they connect, so basically doing those is a way to stay in Dragon Drive. Another thing I want to note here that is a big difference compared to Bellina is in Shadow, so her Agito weapon skill, giving her higher attack rate in her Dragon Drive form, is actually very critical to her being able to get good gauge gain off her basic attacks. I think that's not to be underestimated. It feels a lot slower when you're playing Bellina and you haven't got your Agito skill to use, so that could possibly be the case for Nino as well. You do get that 15% strength increase, and you get at least 10% attack rate here, so maybe I eat my words there a little bit. Notably though, no big defense bump, but unlike Bellina, Nino is not a low HP character, so she probably doesn't need the defense bump as much as Bellina needs it to survive with her shields at that critically low HP. Then when you look at the final two abilities, Flurry Devastation 13% is fine. Extra critical rate when the combo count is 15 or higher. This should be a passive ability not dispelled by Curse of Nihility. Freeze Res 100%. Not great. Bog probably a little bit better. Freeze can feel like a liability in Legend Ciela, even if you have Nino here on AI or something. AIs can definitely get bogged, and it's happened to me before if they have freeze res against Legend Ciela on things like the glaciers. If you're not playing super conservatively, your AI can get bogged. There are other points in the battle when it can happen as well, and it's pretty dangerous with freeze. If you have any character with dual resistances, you could just go break them free, and it feels like a lot less trouble or worry. When I run Legend Ciela, or at least when I did, I used to use Formal Noelle as my primary healer. She's 100% freeze res, and I would just go ahead and straight up give her 100% bog res as well, just to make her life easier and make it so I had to switch units less often. So on net, I would say this is probably worse than bog res, even though Legend Ciela can also freeze you. And against Yaldabaoth only causes bog on the master difficulty, so it's also worse there. Overall, Nino looks fine. She probably is good at dealing with the overdrive gauge, for example, but there's no Storm Lash here, there's no Dispel. You get some strength and defense reduction, which could help with auto, but for lower difficulty auto, it's not really an issue. There's lots of available units that can do that quite well, and at the endgame level, I just don't see how she fits in a particularly novel way. So that is why I say she seems like a fine adventure, but just not a necessity. Love the outfit though, that is really, really cool. Okay, let's move on to Faeblessed Tobias. Also, very dapper outfit here with Mina in the background. Beautiful portrait. Alright, so Faeblessed Tobias, he switched over to the water element. He is a Lance. Fey Judgment is his first skill, deals damage to the target nearby enemies, inflicts freeze, and partially fills the skill gauge for Fey Lance. So this causes freeze. Skill prep potency 20%. I need to look this up. I didn't realize they wouldn't tell us this. So I'm gonna look up the the Fey Judgment freeze chance. Apologies for any clicking that you may hear right now as I vamp as I find this information, but I think this is actually very important. So according to the Dragalia Lost wiki, here we go, 160% chance to cause freeze. It is a shareable skill, which is also kind of cool. That is a pretty good chance to cause freeze. We have Lily, who is sort of the gold standard 200% chance. That is like, you're not going to escape. If you're freezable, you're going to get frozen. Then you have Dragalia Cleo as another high percent chance freeze enabler. I think the Dragalia Cleo is also 160% chance. Could be off plus minus 20 percentage points there, but it's above 100% to be sure. So you have a pretty good chance of landing with her. It might be 180. Because it can miss sometimes, depending on the enemy resistance. Like if they're 99% resistance, it can miss with Dragalia Cleo. This is solid. It's definitely better than if this had been like 120%. And there are opportunities. Ayaha and Otoha and Legend difficulty in earlier difficulties, they're not the easiest to crack as far as autoing, like compared to Ciela. So having freeze is actually pretty big against them because in the earlier difficulties, for example, it stops them from escalating strength buffs when you freeze them. That is actually very significant in terms of survival, and also just being a lance, assuming that Tobias has an HP co-ability, and he does, is also pretty good for survival. Lance leads, in general, are pretty good for autoing Ayaha and Otoha in earlier difficulties. In Legend, I have not done a clear with a lance yet, so I can't really speak to it in Legend. Fey Lance activates Fey Lance, okay. During Fey Lance, the user's standard attack patterns will change, and the user will be unable to move, use force strikes, or dodge. Interesting. Oh, so this is kind of like Tobias's normal form second skill. The skill will also become Spiritual Purge and be immediately ready for use. Fey Lance will end after a set period of time, or after using any skill other than Fey Judgment. Cool. So, 20,000 skill energy. You get Fey Lance for 10 seconds, and this causes Frostbite after the skill change. Interesting. So, similar to regular Tobias, but in regular Tobias, his second skill kind of causes poison. Huh. Tobias, pretty cool adventure here, isn't he? Yeah, so I like this because you have access to Frostbite when you want it. You don't have to take advantage of it and use it. But unlike regular Tobias, there's not a buff component that we've seen so far. So let's read on. Chain Co-ability is solid here. So this one will be dispelled by Curse of Nihility, to my knowledge, as long as this works sort of similarly to others of the same description. This one, unlike Nino's, would get affected by Curse of Nihility, so that's not great. Flurry Devastation won't be, that's fine. Overdrive Punisher won't be, that's fine. And then Stun is 100%, so abilities are pretty straightforward. So in this form, Tobias is much more of a damage dealer, it would seem. This, yeah, I mean, Spiritual Purge, pretty good damage. Obviously, the skill energy is pretty high on this skill. Interesting. Yeah, that's pretty good damage. And then this is 2,000 damage for a decent cost. You get 20% prep on this, which is going to help you because it's so expensive. He's probably a pretty fun adventure to play. So in his case, he actually checks a few more boxes than I think Nino does, whereas Nino probably not the easiest to just throw into your Legend Ciela teams. I mean, if you're experienced, you can clear no problem. I'm sure you can throw in there and it'll be fine. For earlier difficulties, there's no need to use her. With Faeblessed Tobias, I actually think that you could pretty reasonably throw him into a team because a lot of teams will be set up with like a Zanefried and a Lily. Zanefried sort of covers the survival role as a lead and Frostbite, while because of Zane, you need somebody like a Lily, Dragalia Cleo to be the freeze enabler, or you have to use a freeze shared skill. This as a Frostbite enabler plus a freeze enabler plus a little bit of survival is kind of nice. I mean, maybe this is actually a little better than I initially expected because it fulfills multiple affliction rolls. You're still not getting the Dispel, so when you start to talk about Legend, that's where I feel a little bit more skeptical as far as Ayaha and Otoha, and even somebody like Lilith. Although, one positive here is I assume Phaelance should not be dispelled by Curse of Nihility. One positive here is this is actually a pretty resilient kit, Chain Q ability aside, to Lilith and Curse of Nihility. So Tobias would probably be fine against her. But for Legend Ayaha and the Otoha, I don't know if it's enough to have this freeze chance with Frostbite Enabler here on a Lance. My only thought is those combo-centric portions of the fight, or rather hit count-centric portions of the fight, where you have to eliminate the shadow clones of Ayaha and Otoha, it feels like a Lance would be very ineffective in doing that. I've seen people post clears with their Xanfrieds and other Lances, so it's certainly possible, and these people are clearing faster than me, so it's probably my lack of knowledge there more than anything. But it doesn't feel like a Lance would be ideal in that scenario, is what I'm trying to say. And so for that reason, I wonder if you're running, like, let's say, Faeblessed Tobias, then I feel like you still want another member of your team that can account for hit count stuff. You still want another member that can do Dispel, and then you probably want your healer. And maybe that's fine. You know, maybe you have your healer, Dragalia Lily, your hit count and Dispeller in one adventure in the form of Lapis, and then you can just throw whoever as your additional slot. So maybe it works out and it's able to do enough. But yeah, Faeblessed Tobias a little bit better than when I initially would have looked at him, but also pretty straightforward kit here. Pretty straightforward kit. Not a bad thing though when we think about future Sinister Dominion. So one thing with both water and wind, we don't have Sinister Dominion quests yet where you use those elements in the first half of the battle or on the expert difficulty for auto. So thinking ahead to like how do we auto those fights, obviously we don't know what they're like yet. You know, maybe that's where stuff like the strength reduction starts to look more interesting, and maybe even the Dragon Drive potentially, as well as stuff like the HP Co ability here, and just sort of a generic kit that is not too inhibited by Curse of Nihility. Just some food for thought, but that's still obviously a ways off. So let's move on and finally close by talking about Gala Chelle. I won't spend as much time on her since she is the returning adventurer here. Looks as great as ever with her haircut. Splendido Dominio, her first skill, deals damage directly ahead, causes Shadow Blight, and deals bonus damage based on the number of buffs the user has. Max bonus damage is given when the user has 15 or more buffs. Burlongato, her second skill, reduces the strength of a target and nearby enemies, reduces the strength of enemies in buff zones. Very substantial strength reduction, so this can save you, even though this is not a damage dealing skill. This can save you from certain moves in like Legend Kaiyan that might otherwise accidentally one-shot somebody. So putting that strength reduction effect, as small a duration as it is, at the right time when Kaiyan's going for a universal annihilation or something and you don't have good life shields up, can be beneficial. Her first skill, also fine in the context of Kaiyan, because well, buffs work, and she's focused on buff zones to be fair, but buffs work so she can power up her Splendido Dominio, and the Shadow Blight can be used to enable Shadow Blight Punisher Wormprints. Right now there's 0 Sinister Dominion content where you use Shadow Adventures, so there's no telling in the first or second phase exactly how she'll work. But one of the weaknesses, in my opinion, with Gala Chelle right now against Kaiyan and Legend difficulty, and on below difficulties she'll be probably fine, but she just doesn't have Dispel in her kit, and that's a big deal with Kaiyan, with him putting up at least one shield in Legend, couple shields in Master. She's great in Legend at shredding the overdrive gauge in the Berserk portion of the fight, but she's also not a great adventurer in AI control because she's ranged and she stands outside of the battle zone a little too often, is a little bit too prone to some of the hazards that would also apply to the Master difficulty where there's hazards outside the battle zone. So if you can manually control her while having an adventurer on your team who can handle the Dispel, she is a really smooth unit to autopilot, essentially. Or not auto battle, but autopilot in the sense that you can kind of cruise control your way through that fight with minimal effort. But she's still not ideal in my opinion, just because she's kind of like, she's missing that crucial component of Dispel. So I don't see her as somebody that puts you over the top if you're not currently able to clear it. Like, you could probably substitute Vita for her in a lot of teams and be just as successful. Her Chain Co ability is good. That does give you extra Shadow Blight Punisher whenever you're in buff zones and applies to all your Shadow adventures on your team. So in solo, that's pretty good. Gauge Accelerator, fine. Is Co ability good against Berserk? Her abilities, Radiant Scion 2 makes it so that she always transforms into Cat. And when she uses Burlone Gato, she's going to get the Royal Pride effect. It can stack up to 10 times, reduces damage taken. That should be a unique buff that is not dispelled by Curse of Nihility. Princess Grace 2, so she has dual resistances. And then Star of the Dance 2, increases her 4-strike damage. Love to see it on a rapid fire Mancaster like her, because that is their primary thing they're going to do. In her case, I think this is pretty high, so maybe you do use this on cooldown, but at a minimum, you could probably do this to cause Shadow Blight and otherwise 4-strike, and it'd be pretty effective as well. But I think she'd probably want to use her skill all the time. Adventures like Lapis, you don't use the first skill unless you have to Dispel. Anyway, that 4-strike damage, good to see on her. Increases it up to an additional 30% based on the number of buffs she has. And when she has 5 from her Royal Pride stack, she creates a buff zone around her that reduces damage taken by 10%. There's the buff zone piece. So what I'm not 100% sure of is how buffs are counted for her in the future as far as Curse of Nihility. That is also available on the wiki, but I don't know off the top of my head. And as we're late in the video, I think I will just leave it as a mystery. So Gala Chelle, regardless, I don't see as an adventurer who for current content is like a must-have, and if anything, this buff thing is more of a liability than a benefit for future content. So that is my take on her. Still want to summon her, but yeah, that's my perspective. Anyway, y'all, I think that is going to do it for today. So Gala Reborn Poseidon we talked about toward the beginning. We've now covered Gala Chelle, Faeblessed Tobias, and Nino. I hope you've been enjoying Dragalia Lost and life has been good otherwise. Once again, that's going to do it. So let me know how the game's been going for you. Do you plan on summoning on this showcase? What do you think about these adventures? Did you summon any of them? Have you tried them out? Otherwise, everyone, thank you as always for watching. Take care, and I'll see you next time.